Crystal Johnson. I'm the Deputy Center Director for Technology and Research Investments at Goddard Space Flight Center. I am so happy to be going to work every day. I'm one of those people that's found something that I really, really enjoy. So for me, going to work is not really going to work. I go to work and have fun every day. So NASA, you'll see, does all kinds of things, but my direct responsibility is determining what kinds of missions are we going to do for NASA in the science arena, in astrophysics, in earth science, in heliophysics, which is the study of the sun, and looking at planetary science. And then I have to put together a portfolio of technologies and invest in those technologies so that we can mature the technologies in time for us to infuse them into these missions, crazy, crazy missions that we're going to do in the future. And so that's what my responsibility is. And so at my center, I work at Goddard Space Flight Center. NASA has 10 NASA centers. My center is one of the largest centers, and we do all of the satellite development, not all, but quite a bit of the satellite development, and we are the largest science center. So we get to help answer some of the big questions out there, like why are we here and how did we get here? You think about what's out there, all of the other planets that exist, and some of the planets are Earth-like planets, and some of them you could never have a human live on. You think about Mars, for instance. Mars used to be a planet very similar to Earth. It had an environment at one point in time, but what happened to it? Now the atmosphere is completely gone. It's this dry, dry planet. We're trying to understand what happened to it, because whatever happened to it may end up happening to us here on this earth. So we need to understand those processes and know if there's anything we can do to slow those processes down or stop them completely. And then how do we not only survive on this earth, but how do we actually thrive on this earth? As you know, we're getting more and more hurricanes and tornadoes and flooding that's happening all over the world. And we really need to be able to understand the mechanisms causing that. We need to understand what's happening out on the sun, because what happens is you have these, what we call coronal mass ejections. It's like the sun just spits out this ball of fire. And that comes out, and you have solar flares. If those things come down towards Earth, you can knock out a whole power grid. It knocks out things like our GPS satellites and things like that. So my center is the one that monitors what's happening with the sun, and we give early warnings to people so that our assets can be protected. We can say, put yourself in safe mode so that you're not damaged by this solar storm that's happening. As a matter of fact, when Buzz Aldrin and the rest of the crew put their foot down on the moon the first time, if they had done that 1 week later, it would have been devastating, because there was a major solar storm that happened. And we, the humans on this earth, aren't really capable yet of protecting people from those major solar events. So they would have fried, and it would have been on television for everyone to see. And so we have to make sure that we're preventing that kind of thing from happening. And so at our center, we have done over 300 successful space missions that are in operation, and that some of them have completed their operations. But it's in all four core of those areas that I mentioned to you. So one of the crazy things about it, when you have these missions and they're making hard measurements, they're not easy to do, as you can imagine. And most of the time when you're creating something out of nothing, you have to invent new technologies and new capabilities in order to do that. So with over 300 successful missions, we've invented a lot of technologies, working with our international partners from all over the world to be able to do these kinds of missions. And so when you think about the applications, what we do is we take those technologies, we use them for space applications, then we transfer them to private industry so that they can commercialize the technologies and turn them into things that improve the quality of life for all of us around the globe. And so when I say the word NASA, what is it that you think of? Most people think of the International Space Station, somebody floating around, or these kind of images. Is that right? Is there anybody here that thinks of something different when you say NASA? Or CNES, or DLR, any of the space agencies, do you think of anything different from this? It would be good if somebody else raises their hand and says, yeah, we think of something different. Nobody thinks of anything different from that? You do, okay. The blast off for the rockets going into space, she says. So still all of it is space related, right? And you think that most of the things that we do are related to just taking measurements out there in space, and you don't really think of anything else, right? So the purpose of this masterclass today is to shift your view a little bit. So when you hear the word NASA, when you hear the word CNES, when you hear any organization that is a space organization, I really want you to think about things just a little bit differently. Okay, so I think about how things apply in the real world, and I'll give you when it really hit me, it came home to me, and how it really applies to real world. I was on my way to work one day, and I had a really important meeting, so I allowed myself an extra hour to get to work. I have a long commute going to work, and you all have traffic here that is horrible, just like our traffic is in Washington, D.C. And so I'm going to work, and all of a sudden, even though I'm so early, traffic just comes to a screeching halt. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm gonna be late for this meeting. What is going on? And so I had to be there. I'm getting tense, getting frustrated, and we're inching along. As we go a little closer, I see that there was a really horrible, okay, I'm skipping ahead. This is just talking about how it applies in every aspect of your life. The technologies that we transfer to the real world applications are in environment and resources, public safety, transportation, health and medicine, computer and technology, and consumer goods and things that are in your home. So how that applies to me, I was telling you about me on my way, and when I got closer, I actually saw that it was a really, really bad accident. And there was a woman that was trapped inside the car. The car was mangled in very, very tightly. And so then, of course, I'm like, oh my goodness. So then the stress kind of goes away, and I'm like, I really hope that they're able to get her out safely. And so then as we watch a little closer, the emergency people come over with these big cutters, and they use the cutters to actually cut the roof off of the top of the car so that they can pull her out. And at that point in time, I get this warm feeling all over myself, because I realized if it hadn't been for us having to come up with some kind of crazy cutters for the International Space Station, we'd have never been able to get her out of that car. And those are what we call in the United States now the jaws of life. They're being used on the streets every day to be able to rescue people from mangled vehicles and everything else. In this particular case, this woman, there was a barge coming up, and they had a boat had to lift it up so they could get her car out. She was able to get out because of the jaws of life, and her little tiny daughter that she's holding and the daughter walking with her, both of them were in that mangled vehicle with her. And so all three of them were saved by this one technology that we were able to transfer to improve the quality of life for everyone. Then I think about another example. When we had the Columbia accident, have any of you heard of the Columbia accident where we had the major explosion and we killed the astronauts on board? What happened with that is when the Columbia was coming back, actually when it was launching, we had foam that hit some of the tile under the bottom of that vehicle. And what happened is it actually knocked off one of the tiles. So when you have a shuttle, there are tiles under the very bottom that protect it from the heat. When you come back into the Earth's atmosphere, it's so hot that it would burn that whole vehicle up and everybody inside if you didn't have that protective coating under it, those tile. Well, when we were launching, one of the tile got knocked off, and unfortunately it got knocked off right over the tire well. And what happens when you have a tire well and you have tires, then when it gets hot, when it heats up, the tires expand and expand and expand until the point where it exploded. And we had that horrible, horrible explosion. And so we ended up killing the astronauts on board. And we as engineers said, okay, we always learn from our mistakes, and we will never, ever, ever let that happen again. There's gotta be some kind of way that we can inspect those tiles before letting our astronauts come back into the Earth's atmosphere so it doesn't cause them, to have a catastrophic end. So we decided we were gonna take pictures. And so now the problem is when you're launching and you're in a vehicle, you're shaking like this because there's a lot of G-forces going on, and a lot of times it's dark. So your images are blurry and they're dark. So our engineers and scientists came up with these algorithms that take those images and bring them into clarity and then bring them into light so that we can actually see and inspect the bottom of the shuttle so that we can make sure that if there's a problem, when it's on the International Space Station, we can take the time to repair it so they can come back into the Earth's atmosphere safely. We took that technology and we transferred it to the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and all of the police departments across the whole United States. So now they're using it to capture people. If somebody commits a crime, someone rapes someone, is running through an alley or something like that, or they're trying to break into someone's house, the images are dark and grainy. And so now we take that technology, we bring it into clarity, and we bring it to light so that we can actually catch those people that are committing those crimes. So these are the types of things that happen with those technologies day in and day out. When you think about commercial goods, things as simple as a stove. We had one person that came up to us and said, you know what, I've got to do a better job of eating right. It would be so cool if we could have a stove that was actually a refrigerator. So you could put your food in your stove before you leave for work. You are at work, you take your phone and you program your oven to actually turn on at a certain time, cook your food, and then on your way home you decide, okay, I've got to make a stop somewhere. I'm not going to be home when I thought I was going to be home. Let me program my oven to put it on warm so that it's still good for me when I get home. We worked with the private industry companies to create this stove that actually does that function based upon the technology that we had to develop for the astronauts on the International Space Station. We had to be able to have not a whole, the International Space Station has only a limited amount of space, so we had to have devices that could serve multiple functions at the same time. So going from a refrigerator to an oven with a push of a button is something that we had to demonstrate in space. So this particular one, we have had to work with the astronauts trying to, as you can imagine, when you're in a zero gravity environment, you're doing all of this floating. It's hard for you to know which way is up, which way is down. And so we get to a place where astronauts can have motion sickness quite a bit. And so we have to have devices that we can put on the astronauts to monitor whether they're having motion sickness or not. We worked with private industry companies like Armor All to actually transfer that technology to put it on devices. So professional athletes are using body sensing technologies day in and day out. They have it sewn into clothing these days, and you don't even have to buy a special, apparatus to be able to do that. And then, has anyone heard of the company Speedo? Yeah, you've heard of Speedo. Yeah, so Speedo is a swimsuit company that does a lot of swimsuits for professional swimmers. And Speedo came to us because they said, you at NASA do a lot of friction and drag reduction for aircraft. Those models that you use and the calculations that you use and the special material studies that you use at NASA could really help us. Could you guys help us design a swimsuit that would help reduce drag and friction for the swimmers? We said, sure. And so we worked with them to produce the LZ Racer swimsuit. And 1 month after the release of the LZ Racer swimsuit, the athletes used that in the Olympics and broke 13 world records. So it's been very, very successful troubleshooting with NASA, these companies. And in the environment, we had to start taking a look at what kinds of material are we going to need when we're resident on Mars. When we're living on Mars, we're going to have these types of windmills that can survive really, really harsh environments. So we took that technology and have installed these in Alaska to test them out. It's a very cold state in the United States. And in 15 other countries, around 25 other countries around the world, these have been realizing so much efficiency that they're getting rid of some of the power supply companies to actually put these in. It's been very, very productive. And how many of you have ever heard of a whale shark? No one's heard of one? You have? I never heard of them before this. Never heard of a whale shark before. So have you really? Oh my goodness. So we actually have developed these algorithms to map the stars. And apparently these whale sharks are pretty rare creatures out there. And they have very specific fingerprints. All these dots and spots on the whales are just as unique to them as our fingerprints are for us. So we can use those algorithms that help us to map the stars to map the animals under the sea. And these polar bears, I didn't know that polar bears have specific dots on their snouts, and every polar bear's snout has specific dot patterns, just like a fingerprint. And so when you're trying to track the movement of polar bears or the movement of these whales under the water, there have been divers from all over the world that take pictures of these sharks and they're uploaded into a database, and you can actually track the movement of these animals, specific animals, as they migrate in different locations. So we're working with the biologists and everyone else for these as well. In public safety, some very, very interesting technologies that we have here. In our environmental controlled life support system, which is what we've had to use on the International Space Station, and you can imagine why, we're taking the technologies from that, and we're actually, it's a device that we've developed that can take things like your sweat and your urine and transform that into pure drinking water, getting rid of 99.98% of the bacteria and everything else in that water. And we're using those in very, very remote locations that have water that's very, very contaminated with bacteria, and able to have pure drinking water for them with mobile devices. You can take the device out, it can do thousands of gallons per minute of purifying the water so that they can actually have clean drinking water. And this comes from the technologies that were developed for the International Space Station applications. And then also, in the United States, we call football, this kind of football in the United States. Right, it's the wrong football, but this is what we call football. So in the United States, we had one professional football player that had a heat stroke and died because of being out doing practice, just practicing for a game. In the same week, we had a university student who was a football player who also had a heat stroke and died from football practice. And so our media and everyone else got up in a roar saying, what in the world are you guys doing? Why don't you let them get off the field and cool off when it comes time, when you can see that they're in trouble? And the coaches are like, how do we know that a person is in trouble? Because everybody gets flush when they're hot. Everybody is a little red and everybody's sweaty. And how do we know somebody's about to have a stroke? And so they came to us and said, how can you help us with this? Well, we developed a digestible thermometer. It's a pill. And you swallow this pill and it actually measures the core temperature of your body. And so all of the professional football teams these days are using this digestible thermometer to measure what's happening. And then when the coaches see that your pill is rising too high, they'll pull you off and make you go inside and take a rest. Because this has been so successful, the firemen are using this. When they're dropped into a flash fire and there's fire all around and it starts to heat up, they know which fireman or which group, this team of people, their body temperatures are being elevated, so they rush people in and pull them out so that they can make sure that they're saving their lives. We also use these digestible pills for divers. When you're diving in very extreme cold weather, if your body temperature drops below instead of rising above, if it drops below a certain temperature, they know it's time for you to come up, because sometimes you lose track of your consciousness when you're diving, and if you get really, really cold, you don't really know that you're in trouble. And so then they can yank on your thing and tell you you've got to come up. And so that's been very helpful for us as well. We also developed what we call SARSAT, which is a handheld search and rescue device. We are using the satellites to be able to triangulate a person. So all it takes, if you're out on a boat or if you decide to go hiking somewhere and you don't necessarily know where you are, if you have your handheld device with you, you just hit the button, and as long as we can get one signal to our satellites, a couple of different satellites up in the sky will see you, we can find you any place on the planet, any place that you are. We will know exactly where you are, and we can deploy helicopters or anybody else there to rescue you. So we have saved tens of thousands of lives since we have made this commercial and put it out there to help everyone. And then in the medical field, so is this kind of shifting your view just a little bit? Just a little bit. You're not just thinking about space when you think about NASA. All of the things that we're doing for space applications always transfer to private industry. And in 1 year alone, we had over 1,000 technologies and innovations that were patented and that were transferred to private industry. So it is a real economy booster when you invest in things like space, because so many other side of products come from it. It's so beneficial. Thinking about health and medicine, for our James Webb Space, have you heard of the Hubble telescope? that's out there taking wonderful images. Well, we're in the process right now of building the Hubble Part 2. It's called the James Webb Space Telescope. This James Webb Space Telescope is going to see so much further into the past than the current Hubble telescope can look. But in order to do that, we had to polish those mirrors to such fine specifications, we couldn't afford for it to be off by just a little bit. So we had to define some measuring capabilities and algorithms to be able to assess just how precise those mirrors were measured. We transferred that to the people in ophthalmology. So now, in the past, when they were checking your eyes to see if you had an astigmatism or nearsighted or farsighted, it took a long time. It had to open your eye, and it was kind of a painful process for you to keep your eye open all that time, and the wind was blowing. So now they can map your eye in a matter of 2 seconds, your entire eye, and they can tell you right away whether you have an astigmatism or whether you're farsighted or whether you're nearsighted, all from the techniques that we had to use for measuring mirrors for space. And then in this particular one, we had 2 doctors that were very, very concerned. They were open heart surgeons. And they came to us and they said, we have patients that are in between getting a heart transplant. And so we need some kind of device. Their heart is not strong enough to be able to pump the blood through the rest of their system while they're waiting for the transport. Can you help us come up with a pump that we can use to help these heart transplant patients? We worked with them and came up with a specific pump that they can now install into humans, and we've installed it into multiple pediatric patients as well. It's been very successful with kids. When they're waiting for their transplant, this pump goes in and is able to pump the blood throughout their whole bodies and has saved hundreds of lives already with this particular technology. So in thinking about the kinds of things that we've been able to do from the technologies of the past, what kinds of things are we going to be able to do in the future? What does the future hold for all of us when it comes to space? Because we've gotten a lot of the amenities and comforts that we have today because people dared to do something very, very differently. And so when you think about the future, right now we're all very earth reliant. We live on this earth, and that's the only place that we're able to live. We're going to be here no matter what. So if there's a devastating event that happens, like with the dinosaurs, and it just happens again, but this time it knocks out all the humans, what are we going to do? Don't know. So we're in the process now of moving from an Earth-reliant state and using the moon as a proving ground before we head on to Mars. And when I say using the moon as a proving ground, in the United States and working with our international partners, we've been given the mandate that we are going to go back to the moon. We'll have the first woman and the next man on the surface of the moon by 2024. That's 5 years. 5 years! Ugh! That means there's a lot of stuff that has to happen between now and 5 years in order for that to happen. I mean, boots on the ground, humans there. And this is not just to go there, but this is actually to have a sustained presence on the moon and to test out all kinds of technologies that we need to be able to go on to Mars. So that's going to take a lot of ingenuity. It's going to take a lot of creativity. It's going to take a lot of partnerships all over the world for us to be able to do that in 5 years. That means we don't have time to invent anything new. We don't have time to be creative and say, let's invest in this whole new technology that'll be ready 10 years from now. We have to pull from the best and the brightest that already exists. We have to reach into the corners of every country and say, what are you doing that we could actually use for this application? And what are you doing that we can use for another application? And partner to pull all of that together. And eventually we get to a place where we are having a sustained presence on the moon, on Mars. So a sustained presence on Mars is really a big deal because at this point in time, we don't have the ability to even protect humans to make the trip to Mars. The radiation alone would fry everybody. And so we have to develop new suits, we have to develop all kinds of technologies in order for us to be able to get there. So if you think about where we are today and what we have to get to have a full sustained presence on Mars, let's just kind of go not just to 2024 or even 2030, where are we going to be in 2100 and work our way back? So If you think about 2100, this could be what we're looking at in 2100 up on this screen here. A sustained presence on the moon, and some people say a Terra presence, you're going to be up on top of the ground. Most people say, no, really, we're going to have to be underground. So what happens, and this is actually going to, in order for us to have a city like this, we're going to need help like what you all have to offer, smart cities. Thinking about what is going to be necessary there, imagine the Internet of Things being extended out to the moon and onto Mars. In order to be able to do that, we're going to have to step up our game in terms of smart cities or learning cities, whatever we're going to end up calling those things. We've got to step up all of that in order to be able to apply it. And why that's so important is because you're going to have to be able to monitor the health of the astronauts on the surface down there. You're also going to have to be able to remotely control whatever rovers we have that are going off to the sides and exploring different places. We're going to have another line that communicates to us and tells us there's a solar event that's about to happen. Astronauts need to get into cover right now. So the communication has to be constant and it has to be reliable. That is the very difficult thing. Reliable communications are going to be very, very necessary. And so when you think about the moon and you think about, the Mars and where you're going to live there, if we're talking about going underground, what is really important is the lava, the molten lava system, the volcanic action that's taking place right now on Mars. What happens is the molten lava kind of finds its way around and carves out these tunnels, these caves, or what we call lava tubes. And in those lava tubes, as they start to cool off, you'll find that there are, in some of those locations, we'll be taking robots first to kind of explore those tubes on Mars. And then at some point in time, after we're sure that it's safe to actually put humans down there, we'll be doing human exploration along with robots in those caves. And ultimately what we're looking for is we're looking for ice particles under the ground in those lava caves, lava tubes. If we find ice particles, that lets us know that's where we can actually establish a habitat. And when we say habitat underground, it actually is going there and inflating this habitat, a big, huge balloon thing that is where people will actually be able to live and establish electricity and everything else that we need under the ground. And so the cool thing about the communication piece of it, we're demonstrating optical communications, which is really, really fast transfer of data, 1.2 gigabits per second, really, really soon. But in order to do 3D video capability, we're going to want those robots, when they first go down, it's going to be streamed live to all of your classrooms. So whenever we start to explore a new tunnel and there's evidence that there could be a really good find, all of the classrooms the kids will be able to look at those. And I say kids, not necessarily college students, but the younger kids, and you, if you're interested, would be able to look at that and see exactly what's being discovered real time and live. And then once we'll have the gateway flying up there, part of that gateway has a transport module that goes down to the surface, helps collect samples, then brings it back up to the gateway. The gateway is like an International Space Station, but it's an ISS on steroids. So it can actually fly to whatever location you want, drop down to pick up things, and then come back and fly to another location, whatever you want. And right now, the whole international community, all of the countries are working together to establish roles and responsibility for developing this gateway and looking at which scientists are going to be involved from which countries and things like that. So this is in progress. This is already being worked on, and we're really on our way to being able to do some amazing things in the future. And so streaming it to the classrooms, why is that important? It's so important for us to motivate the next generation, because it's going to be you guys in this room really, because you're at a stage right now where you will be the next leaders of a CNES, or you'll be the next leaders of companies, CEOs of companies that are going to be able to actually do this kind of stuff. Mining on the surface of Mars, and even getting started with mining on the surface of the moon, so we can make sure we know how to do it when we get to Mars. And so we're definitely looking at the future. For us, it's just important. I'm so happy to see so many young ladies here in the audience, because when we think about innovation, has anyone here seen that movie, Hidden Figures? Yes. You have? Awesome. Awesome, awesome. So when it comes to doing really, really difficult things, it really doesn't matter what you look like. It doesn't matter where you come from or anything else. We just need the solution to the problem. We need the best ideas brought to the table. We need the best thinkers sitting in that room to help us solve the problems, because if we don't, people die. And so that's why it's so important for us to make sure that we have diversity in gender, diversity in background. I mean, even if you have all women in the room, you have to have people from totally different backgrounds in order to have different ideas come to the table. You need diversity in age, because not only, the seasoned people need to be in the room, and not only the young, innovative, creative ones, although you can have young, innovative, and creative in both of those categories. We need complete diversity in order to get the best and the most creative solutions. And that's one of the reasons I'm excited to go to work every day, because I work with people from all over the world and I get ideas from every corner, and I'm very interested to hear what you have to say in any arena that you have. So getting our young students, and especially our young girls, because we have so many young boys as engineers and scientists already, we definitely need to bridge the gender gap to get more girls engaged, and girls from all over the world. So any opportunity any of you get to broaden yourself and to actually give yourself some exposure in a different area from what you're accustomed to, it just makes you a much better, more rounded person in whatever field it is that you're going to do. So take advantage of any opportunity that's thrown your way. So that's all I have for you. Merci beaucoup. Appreciate it.